My name's Imani, and we will get started talking about some French fashion and culture. I'm a global ambassador with the Study Abroad office, and thank you for coming. Welcome. All right, so let me share my screen, and we can get started. So can everyone see? All right, cool. A little bit about me. I studied abroad in Paris last year, from February to March 2020. It was supposed to be till May, but things happened. Um, I studied abroad with the program with a nonprofit called CIEE. And I went with their global campus program, which means that you could study for up to 6 weeks in three different places, for three different blocks. So, block one, I was in London for 6 weeks, and blocks two and three were supposed to be Paris. And yeah, and it was great. I had a great time. Um, and I chose France for the language and the culture. I had been studying French for many years at that point, and I had never been, so I really, really wanted to go to get a chance to practice. And I really was really curious about French culture and all of that, and a little bit for the aesthetic, the idea of France as this luxury place, with a lot of really interesting and just the interesting cultural aspects of France. Um, so yeah, that's my reasoning for going to France, and it was great. I loved it. And of course, I had known about France's reputation as being this fashion capital of the world, and I really wanted to see that in action, see what that looked like, if that was reflected in the culture, how the idea of France as or at least Paris as a fashion hub, um, how that impacted the people there and their day-to-day lives. And what I found is that there's a greater emphasis put in on style and appearance. Um, People don't really go out of their house like in sweatpants or leggings unless they're going to the gym or something like that. These sort of athleisure or just wearing regular workout clothes as your outfit isn't as much of a thing, um, at least from what I noticed. And usually, what would appear as more dressed up to Americans is considered like the standard in France. But people still do dress casually, like people will wear jeans and sneakers and things like that. But it's slightly more of a put together feel, I think, from what I noticed. And so, yeah, so the idea, the reputation that France has as being a place of curated fashion, I think holds up. And it's been that way for a long time. And we'll get into why. And part of the reason why is because of this guy, Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King. He's a very extravagant person. He moved the royal court from Paris to Versailles. Um, he expanded Versailles into kind of what it is now. And since his reign in the 1600s, France has kind of become the pinnacle of fashion. And one of the ways he did that was transforming France into a luxury goods powerhouse. The monarchy took control of trade in terms of textiles, and Louis valued appearance, style, dress code. He had dress codes for his court members. With his reign was sort of the beginning of seasons, so you had, the fall fashion season, winter fashion season, etc. And also the fashion press became more common during this time. People would write style guides of what to wear, um, who was wearing what, that sort of thing. Kind of like I guess like a precursor to Vogue and fashion magazines. Um, and also during his reign, he curated standards for interior design and food. And I think that sort of thing has trickled down to France as a whole. Um, and and yeah, he um, also had high standards for his members of court. So these are just some examples of what people were wearing during the reign of Louis XIV. This is a family portrait. Um, and these are just examples of what the courtiers would wear. Um, as you can see, it's very extravagant. Get a lot of bows, a lot of colors, and yeah, that was kind of the signature style of that period, at least among the aristocracy. And then we have the Rococo fashion of the 18th century. Um, and this one, you have Marie Antoinette, who's kind of the most famous representative of that era. It's signified by, again, a lot of extravagance, even more dramatic than the previous era. You have these very wide skirts, lots and lots of ruffles and colors. The downside was that this was very, very expensive, and it's one of the things that definitely hurt the peasants. And investing in this such extravagant forms of fashion um, kind of made a lot of people upset, and I think is one of the things that led to the revolution eventually. Um, but as you can see, there's some more examples of the Rococo style. So there's lots of colors going on, very extravagant. The men's wear, again, still more subdued than women's wear, as it often is, but still extravagant embellishment, lots of detail, very high wigs, which we saw in Louis XIV's era as well. It just carried over into this era. Um, and over here, this is Marie Antoinette again in a more softer example of Rococo wear. And then we're gonna skip ahead a little bit to the Belle Epoque and Les Années Folles. Belle Epoque means beautiful era, and this time period was marked in France with a lot of economic prosperity in the 1800s. Things were just going really well, and during this time, Vogue France opened in 1920. In 1860, in the 1860s, American Vogue opened and began writing a lot about French designers, which really helped cement the idea of France as a world power of fashion. Also, after the French Revolution, when Napoleon had taken over leadership of France, he used fashion to give France a greater national identity after the revolution and cement that idea into France. So this is kind of, again, where we see fashion being heavily incorporated into French culture. Many French fashion houses were established during this time. I have them listed here. You have Jacques Doucet, Jean Paquin, and the Cailloux Sœurs, which is run by four sisters, which I thought was really cool. And here, this was the attire before the 1920s. You have, it's still quite extravagant for modern day standards, but far more subdued than the Rococo era and Louis XIV's era. But you have the cinched in waist and very long hemlines and more detailed designs. That was the marker from the 1800s to the early 1900s, and into the 1920s. And we'll see more designers pop up. And also in the 1920s, we have Coco Chanel, one of the most iconic French designers to begin in this period. So she began her luxury brand in 1925. And she emphasized this idea of an understated elegance. She influenced a lot of 1920s trends in women's fashion, prioritizing more masculine silhouettes as compared to the previous era, which we saw again very cinched. We had cinched waist lines, a very feminine silhouette for women's wear. And Chanel kind of changed all of that. And she also popularized the little black dress, which is something that is considered a wardrobe staple for many people, even to this day. It's really interesting to see how long her influence kind of lasted. Um, and this picture of her here, I picked this picture because she's wearing one of her designs, but also this picture is from uh, I believe the 60s, I think. Um, and this style of jacket is still seen in Chanel's designs today. This is long after Coco Chanel's time, and I think it's kind of cool how her style has maintained its uh, mark on the brand and on other fashion houses today. And these are just some examples of Chanel's designs. So as you can see, you have a very sort of straight up and down silhouette, very different from the previous era, again with her sort of understated elegance sort of thing. Short hair was also popular in her models, which was new for the time. Um, and yeah, so that's Chanel. And during World War II, French fashion really took a hit due to the limited availability of fabric. There was just, it was wartime, so there really couldn't be much development put into fashion. Um, However, I did want to make one note. One of the things that women did to show that they were part of the resistance during World War II was to put different things in their hair. So wear very ridiculous hats with very silly like feathers or like animal print or something to show that they were not with the Vichy regime, with the German occupation. They were quietly resisting. And they did that to show solidarity with people in the resistance, but to kind of keep themselves and their families safe. Um, so I thought it was really cool. Another way that fashion um, lent itself to French culture. Um, and yeah. But after the war, you have Christian Dior come in with his new look. So the new look is this dress on the right that this woman has on here. It is supposed to be a fun, playful answer to the previous era of women's wear being more structured and less sort of flouncy, I guess. It was characterized by, again, the cinched in waist and poofy fabric at the bottom um, to, yeah, just bring a more feminine silhouette back. And it was controversial at the time. One, because people felt that the waistlines were too small, that they were too cinched in, and that was not appropriate. Um, and also it was expensive to create. There was a lot of fabric at the bottom with the poofy skirt, and people were kind of put off by that, especially after going through the wartime scarcity that was made people a bit uncomfortable. But nevertheless, it gained a lot of popularity. It influenced many, many things, many other designers, and is still a silhouette that's very common today. And also during the 50s, many other well-known fashion houses opened up and became popular, like Pierre Balmain in Givenchy. They're both still very popular luxury brands to this day. And yes, they became popular in post-war France. And then we have the next era of the 1960s and pret-a-porter, which are just clothes that are ready to wear. You can just buy them. And the 1960s was an interesting time for high fashion because you had competition from London coming in with new fashion trends from there influencing the youth, and also changing social climates changed attitudes towards luxury brands. So you had a growing youth culture, a growing alternative scene, and a growing distaste for very, very expensive things for very, very wealthy people and what that sort of represented, which kind of goes along with many of the social movements going on in the 60s, both in the UK, in the US, and France. Was a big time of a lot of turmoil socially, um, and that changed attitudes towards high-end brands, so things had to change. And then you had Yves Saint Laurent come in with pret-a-porter fashion, which are clothes that were, it's kind of the beginning of mass production for luxury brands, which made it more accessible to regular people. They didn't have to have these clothes commissioned for them, they could just buy them. They were still incredibly, incredibly expensive, so they were not affordable by any means, but they were more accessible. Um, Another thing that Saint Laurent did was incorporate menswear into women's wear, um, which was relatively new at the time, and it really he was very influential to the high fashion landscape in that way. And here are some more of his designs. Again, you have, this was very iconic, I believe in the 1960s. This outfit here came out of a menswear styled suit for a woman, which also sort of reflected the times. This was the wave of second wave feminism, where women were seeking more equality and more autonomy, and that was represented in this suit, or one of the ways it was represented. In the middle picture, we have Yves Saint Laurent's collaboration with the painter Mondrian. This color blocked dress here is a direct homage to the Mondrian paintings of a similar style. So this was an example of the Saint Laurent incorporating art and fashion in this way. And another interesting point about Saint Laurent is that he championed diversity a lot earlier in the fashion world, in the high-end fashion world, than other designers. So on the far right, we have Iman. Um, this was a photo shoot, I believe, in the 80s that she did with Saint Laurent, and he worked with many models of all kinds of ethnicities. But one of the things that he helped with Iman was he helped to get her on the cover of Vogue because she came to him telling and told him that they wouldn't put on the cover. But he made a call and kind of argued with them and helped her get her Vogue cover. Um, so yeah, and we have the cities of fashion in France for our next segment, and of course, like Paris, that's the biggest fashion city in the world, honestly, I think. Um, you have the Champs-Élysées, which is this large boulevard in Paris where all of the luxury fashion brands are. There's the Chanel store, you've got the Louis Vuitton store here, many other stores, not just French brands, but international brands. They're all in this area. You've got Paris Fashion Week twice a year, and many designers from all around the world still flock to Paris to learn. There are many fashionable cities. Of course, you've got New York, you've got London, Tokyo, even, but people still go to Paris to learn because the fashion scene is that strong, and the reputation is still very strong for Paris and fashion. So a lot of what I've talked about so far is our luxury brands, which are not accessible to most people. So I did want to mention some affordable things in Paris. Maybe if you want to go to Paris when we can all travel again and you want to go shopping. Um, these are some of the things that I did when I was there. So I went to a lot of thrift stores and vintage stores. Thrift store in French is friperie. So I went to a lot of friperie. um, Sheen Machine is a more vintage sort of setup. You can find a lot of really cool things there. The one that I went to the most was this one on the second bullet point, Freep Star. There's a lot of those around Paris. I actually stumbled upon that one by accident. I was looking for something else, and then I found this store, and I was like, oh, I saw that online. So I went in and I got some cool pants from there. Um, so yeah, that's one of the more affordable things you can do. You have Marché aux puces, which means flea market. You can, especially if you're shopping for like home goods, you can find a lot of really good things and a lot of really interesting pieces at flea markets. Um, there's Les Soldes, which is just a massive sale in summer and winter. I was not there for Les Soldes, but things you can have things up to 80% off. And this is for all stores. So you've got Chanel has stuff for 80% off, and you have H&M that has things for 80% off. So that's a period where a lot of people will do their shopping to get really great deals on items. Um, and then you have some brands. These are two of my favorite French brands. You have Mahe and Zadig and Voltaire. Um, they're still expensive. They're not a luxury brand, so they're certainly more affordable than all the other designers I mentioned, but they're still a little bit pricey. But you can find nice things from them on sale. Um, and of course, there are tons of boutiques all across Paris. I stumbled across a lot of them while I was there, and there's still regular fast fashion in France too, if you want to do that. So yeah, so that's that on Paris. Then we've got Marseille, which is the second largest city in France. It has its own fashion district. Rue de la Tour is the fashion district in Marseille. It's also called like Fashion Street because of that's where a lot of the boutiques are, a lot of where you can just find hubs of designers. They also have a fashion week twice a year. And there's also exhibits where local designers can show off their work and what they've been doing. And it's supported by the government, which I think is really cool. The government really like sponsors artists and fosters that mentality there, which I think is really cool. And again, it's another one of those things that shows how important fashion and art and that sort of thing is important to France, so much so that even the government supports it. Um, so yeah, that's really cool. And then we've got Lyon, which is the second biggest consumer of luxury goods. It's the silk capital of the world and has been since the 17th century. A lot of silk is processed there. Um, Rue de la République is considered like the Champs-Élysées of Lyon. There's like a lot of luxury brands and designers and a very bustling fashion scene. And also Lyon is growing a lot in recent years. A lot more people are moving there, so that contributes to their sort of cultural rise, I think. That was all that I had prepared for today. Um, I hope you guys had fun. I had fun. And yeah, this was a lot of fun to research, and thank you guys for coming.